and kind of your whole existence is based on this intersection of activism and political things and borders that are happening, you kind of feel a responsibility to be active in your community. And so growing up, I was very much a part of the church, which was a traumatizing experience in itself, and I'm still trying to get over. But one of the things that I did gain from it is that there was a big sense of community. And so that community was something that, talking about, it's so important to build. And I think it looks different for different people. Like sometimes we work in the field of activism, but we don't necessarily have a community within the field that we work in because it is so hard and so traumatizing in itself. And so finding that community of maybe 2 or 3 people that are really there for you. So continuing from that, kind of growing up undocumented, and I'm actually from California. I don't live here anymore, but I'm from here. And so thinking about, I was talking to a friend, and it's like, oh, what were you doing when you were in high school? And she was like, oh, I was a cheerleader. And I was like, oh, I was organizing walkouts. And so, in high school we were organizing walkouts. It was the big immigration walkouts, and we were like, and our teachers told us, like, you better come to class because you're not going to walk. And I'm like, I don't give a shit about walking across the stage when, I can't walk down the street because I have a fear of deportation. So activism has always been a huge part of my life, and was instilled by my parents, and they were always very conscious and active in their own way. My mom was very religious, and so her way of being politically active was through the venue of the church. And my dad was an atheist, so yeah, they obviously didn't end up together. And so in his way, he was very like, let's look at history and look at facts, and like we're being screwed over by all the white people. And so it was definitely like an interesting way of looking at activism and building community. And so recently I moved to DC, which is a shit show of activism. Yes, Lydia knows, and we've seen each other in a lot of the same spaces, because I feel like local organizing is so powerful. Where the story Lydia was talking about, like, we talk about these big systematic, we talked about school to prison pipeline and these big issues, but when it comes down to it, like, what are we doing with the people in front of us? And how are we, telling that student that, oh yeah, maybe you shouldn't do this because you're not apt for it. Like, we are continuing the oppression that we say that we're fighting. And so in the day-to-day that we are doing, kind of how are we upholding those systems of oppression, and how are we kind of being oppressed. So back to DC, it's kind of a shit show because everybody who wants to kind of be the leader of whatever goes to DC and they want to run the show. So you have like everybody fucking wanting to run a show and nobody wanting to actually do real change. So it's definitely been interesting. Some of the stuff we did in, I don't know if my phone, is it still working? Some of the stuff that I did in DC is we organized with the Ayotzinapa parents. And if you don't know about Ayotzinapa, it's like this big thing where the government disappeared and killed students in Guerrero. And so we organized with the parents and raised money for them. And actually, it was really powerful because we did it in conjunction with the Black Lives Matter movement in DC. And so we held an event where we talked about state violence and solutions for community building and how it looks in the case of Ayotzinapa and how it looks in the case for Black Lives Matter, and how we're, as communities that are oppressed by the state, we are looking for community-led solutions. So calling the cops, as we've talked about, is like the worst thing anybody can do. Like, please delete that from your memory. Do not call the cops, but like, what are ways of building these systems? So in Ayotzinapa, they actually came up with community-led policing, where they have community members who are in charge of kind of watching out for community, and they have specific roles. And they obviously don't call the police because it's a very real threat of death. And so kind of sharing these things amongst each other, like Berkeley, the badass thing they did with accessibility in the city, like let's take that back to our local areas to make sure that we're doing that wherever we're at. I want to kind of finish up by talking about, yes, we are oppressed as Latinos with disabilities, but let's be real, the majority of us are white. And we have a lot of white privilege. And so we need to recognize that the reason we got here is because of white passing privilege, right? So a lot of us are in academia, a lot of us are in higher education getting doctorate's degree, which is badass and amazing, but we got to it because of our white privilege. So what are we going to do to make sure that the people that are not here, okay, I'm gonna try again. So that the people that are not here, that are incarcerated, that did drop out of school, because like there's people that are way better ideas than I ever came up with, but they were not able to continue in school because school is an oppressive system that was made for people with white privilege to succeed, and so that's why we're here succeeding. And so specifically, I was thinking yesterday about, and I don't know if I'm saying the name correctly, but Philandro Castile, am I saying that? Philandro Castile. And I was thinking, and there was actually a really great article that y'all should read about how, as Latinxs, we need to hold ourselves accountable for that. So I think a lot of times we put ourselves, I do it a lot too, and I put myself in with like, oh, us as people of color, we're being oppressed. But really I'm not being oppressed because I do have white privilege. And so in our community, we are very anti-Black. And it's something that we need to hold ourselves accountable for. That Latino communities are very anti-Black and praise light skin. In all of our communities, I know we all have stories about like a new baby is born and all of our families like, oh, are they white? Oh, they're so pretty. Oh, güerita, you know, I was called güerita my whole life growing up. And, you know, and it's like, damn, that's so fucking racist. It's literally somebody calling you white, and it's like an endearing term. And my mom still calls me that, and I'm trying to get her to break it. And I'm like, Mom, like, and she's like, oh, but, you know, I mean it in a good way. I'm like, yeah, but you're like upholding anti-Blackness, so let's not. And so we need to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable and our community. So yes, like, we are being oppressed. Yes, the white man and all that shit, but we are a part of that. And so what can we do to change that? And it begins with us holding ourselves accountable. So the police officer that murdered him was a Latinx, right? And so we need to hold our communities accountable when our families start to talk about these issues and, you know, talk about all the racist shit that our families talk about and being like, no, I'm not going to be a part of that, and I'm going to have discussions with my family about it. Because a lot of times we stay quiet and we're like, oh, it's my family again, you know, talking all their anti-Blackness, but we stay quiet because we're not being affected by it, and we think we could just, you know, throw it under the rug. So we need to hold ourselves accountable in our communities and make sure that we are being representative of the Latino community, because the Latino community is not white-passing, high-educated Latinos. You know, the Latino community is a wide array of all of that. Yes, it includes us, but it also includes Afro-Latinos and Indigenous Latinos and, you know, mixed-race Latinos, that we need to uplift their stories and have them be at the forefront. And sometimes it means us being like, no, I'm not going to be on that panel, which now I feel shitty because we're on this panel. But sometimes it's saying like, no, I will not do that because there are other people that are not white passing that can do it, because you just feel comfortable with having my face be there because I do pass as white. Okay, so I'm going to finish by saying, you know, we need to move towards being more inclusive of all Latinos with disabilities, including Afro-Latinos, homeless Latinos, low-income, poverty Latinos, LGBT Latinos, and we need to know when to take a seat and give space to other people. Thank you.
So, thank you, Conchita. I was curious anyway, so I hear you and everything you said. let you know that. We are all here too. And so our next speaker is Reveca. No se oye, ¿verdad?
No se oye muy bien. No, but you need to like put it directly in front of your mouth. Not, don't stick it to the side of it.
Yeah.
What is?
I can't Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Much better.
Okay, so now I'm just gonna pass the mic over to Reveca, who is also going to tell us of the great work that she has been doing and how she has been a great activist and all the work that she's doing with backbones and all back home in Chicago.
Hi, I'm Reveca Torres. I feel honored being on this panel with these awesome ladies. So thank you for including me and asking me to be a part of this. I think, I wanted to talk about basically my story and how I came to do advocacy and activism work. I'm an artist, and I'm also a founder and director of Backbones, which is an organization that provides peer support and helps people with spinal cord injuries and their families connect back with their communities after their injury. I myself was in a car accident in Mexico at the age of 13, and I was paralyzed from the chest down. My family was also involved in the accident. Many of them were injured as well. So there was a lot of stuff that happened during that accident, that traumatic time. And then coming back to Chicago, I was born and raised in the Chicago area. That's when really things started happening, and like dealing with hospitals and insurances. And my parents, although they have lived in the States since the 70s, really didn't know English very well. So a lot of that came down to me and my siblings, and we were all kids, trying to translate for my parents, letting them know what was going on, what they needed to do, translating medical things and insurance things that, we had no clue about. But we did our best as we could. And now, as an adult and working in a hospital setting for a few years, I am aware that, we should have had a medical translator. We should have had someone that was able to share that information that our family needed at that time, and not relied on us as kids to do that. Like I said, my injury was at 13, and right before starting high school, scary time as it is. And so I basically just did not want to be seen. I wanted to make my disability be invisible. And I would do all these like weird things like that I thought would make me seem less disabled, and now it's like it was very obvious. I'm in a chair, there's no way of hiding it. And so at the same time, also my school wanted me to transfer to a different school, which was also in the same district, but provided some more accommodations for students with disabilities, and also was more wheelchair accessible. And of course, I was like, I don't need to transfer schools. Like, I have the right to stay in my own school. And I really fought for it for a long time. And then my parents said to me, well, why don't you give it a try? And if you hate it, then you can come back. And what really persuaded me was the fact that I wanted to, my goal was to be a fashion designer. And I found out that they had a fashion show at that school and a fashion program in their home ec department. That's what really hooked me, really, out of anything. And I went very hesitant to do so, but once I was there, I had two teachers, both that teacher that was in the fashion department who quickly showed me that I could sew again. And she showed me an adaptive sewing machine. And then I had another teacher who encouraged me to be a part of, to join clubs and to just like participate in extracurricular activities, which in the past I really hadn't done because my parents were like, you come home and you help your mom clean and help care for the kids. I never really did that stuff, but he encouraged me to become involved, and he kept on telling me that I was a leader, something that I didn't think that I was. But just hearing those things over and over, I think kind of stuck in my brain, and they encouraged me to go to college, and I applied to the fashion program at the community college. Was the first student that they had in a wheelchair, so it was kind of, a big deal, and I had to advocate for myself first, to get an assistant in class and to be able to go on school trips and all of that stuff. And I did end up getting help from DHS and vocational rehab, and initially, I felt guilty asking for these services, for special services and assistance in class, and to get assistance with my tuition for vocational rehab. I felt like other people were more deserving than myself, and until one day my sister said something to me. She changed my mind, and she's like, "You deserve all of this, and if you need to get assistance, then take it." And so I did take advantage of that. I was able to get my tuition paid for school, and then eventually purchasing hand controls for a vehicle so that I could drive and, have and work, and then, attendance, having attendant care, which at the time I had only gotten care through my family. And so that was a big step for me, learning how to manage my own care, personal care attendance, and become independent, and understand that me being independent didn't mean that I had to do everything for myself. It meant that I knew how to manage my care. I graduated. After that, I transferred to the University of Arizona. I graduated with a degree in theater arts, became a costume designer, and came back to Chicago, and was also doing disability work, and specifically working on fitness for people with disabilities, and also transitioning to adulthood with teenagers. And I loved doing that because I was able to share with them, the things that I had learned, and just watch them grow and learn things and have goals and find ways to pursue their goals. In 2009, I started Backbones, the organization that I had talked about earlier. And that came about because, as I started interacting with others with disabilities, which didn't really happen until college, both people with spinal cord injuries, which I learned so much about, but also cross disabilities that weren't, things that I had never learned about. And it just impacted my life so much, and I learned from them things that I hadn't learned in rehab. I became more confident in trying new things and just doing a lot of things for myself. And I also noticed that there was a lot of lack of information out there for people. And around that time also, I was, sort of in conflict with myself, because I felt like I had to either, pursue something in the arts and pursue something in disability. And I couldn't see how these two things, sort of came together. But after doing some work with Backbones, starting Backbones, and I understood that I can use the arts for advocacy, for awareness, and we did a lot of this through images and sharing. We're bombarded with images every day, and I think I talked about this a little bit yesterday. But we see images, thousands of images a day, and a lot of the representation of people with disabilities are representations as objects of pity or inspiration, and so there's nothing really in between that, and I wanted to change that. So using images, we did some exhibits, art exhibits, with some museums that were also touring to sort of try and change that. I also was invited to participate in a program called Roll on Capitol Hill with United Spinal, which was to go to DC and talk to legislators and talking about our needs as people with disabilities, different bills and stuff. And I was terrified because my background was in the arts, and I was like, I don't know anything about policy, about laws. I'm going to be talking to these people that are, making decisions, and they're legislators. I have no clue, and I really was terrified to go. And once I completed that program, I came to understand that, they're just people like us, and a lot of them had never even talked to a person with a disability, which was so surprising to me. And being able to share my story and being able to understand that I have rights and that these people, work for us, and they're there to hear our needs and to implement them. And so, just using my story to share that, and I was like, oh, well, this is easy. I can talk about myself. I can talk about my story, even though I didn't feel like I was, super knowledgeable on the policy side of it. But my point is, that there's really, many avenues for people with disabilities, for anybody to get involved and to be advocates, to get involved in activism. I think somebody said yesterday, just being is activism, and I thought that was a great thing to say. But also, taking action is really important, and there's a variety of ways of doing that. We can write letters, we can contact our legislators, make phone calls, create artwork, films, documentaries, short videos. Using social media, I think, is so powerful right now. We can make like a quick, video with our phones or a photo. It can really say a lot and be shared and really educate people and make them aware of different things. So I think, activism can come in a variety of different ways. And one thing, I'm pushing for and hoping is to get more young people with disabilities involved in advocacy and activism, so that they can continue the work that's been, done and that's being done, and offering these opportunities for them to have professional and personal development. And I think in my case, that was pivotal for me to have those opportunities, and really, explore and understand that I could be a leader. And I think, this does create leaders in our community. They're the people that are going to become, entrepreneurs or civic leaders, professors, actors, advocates, and like lawyers, anything, like medical professionals. Really, they're the people that are, by helping them, reach those goals. And I think I guess I'll end with my own personal simple way of, building and engaging the disability community is to find these gifts and find, the amazing and the individuals that I work with and celebrate that, helping them see that they, that they have, that their goals are attainable, but also if they feel like they don't have a goal, helping them find those goals, so that everyone can really live the quality of life that they desire, not what someone else is imposing on them, and support that. And then offering opportunities, like I said, for growth and for leadership, and educating people, letting them know that they can be advocates. Like I said, I felt like I wasn't one. I didn't know, anything about, how to contact my representatives and things like that. And I think a lot of people don't do that because they feel like they don't know how. And it's very, very simple to do that, to create these leaders. And and I know somebody said earlier, how do we get these people here? What are the barriers? And I know everyone in this room is probably a leader doing some great work in their own community, but my goal is that, next year when we do this conference, we get those people that are not here, and we get them in this room, and we get them to understand that they are leaders too. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. No. Reveca, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for those words. I think we do need to bring more people to the room it is not here, most definitely. We want to give the floor now to Lydia, and for her to speak about the great work and how. So I want to, after Lydia speaks, I want to pose that same question that Reveca just talked about. How do we bring more people to this that is not here? I think that's a question for all of us. If for the next year, obviously we want to have this conference again. So how can we bring 2 people from Phoenix, Texas, I don't know, everywhere, come back? Whoever is the conference is hosted. So yes. Go ahead, Lydia. Sorry.
This back. Can folks hear me? Can you check that the person next to you can hear me?
Yes.
Someone cannot hear me? Or everyone can?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I want to preface this remarks by noting that I discovered as Dolores began talking, so if any of you noticed my looks of dismay, it was not directed at Dolores. It was directed at discovering that a Facebook group that I had created for chronically ill, disabled, mad, and other neurodivergent Asians was shut down by Facebook. I was informed that our group was shut down while Dolores was talking. It was shut down because of our alleged hate speech and threatening individuals by having a space specifically for disabled, sick, and mad Asians. And I want to mention that because the work that I've been doing for many years now, and I'd like to think that as years have gone by, I have done better. I think that, bringing up the point I had mentioned earlier, that it is important for us to address as a barrier to organizing in communities our own ableism and honestly all of our own shit. Whether that is what Conchita was talking about, our anti-blackness for those of us that are non-black people of color. Whether that is our anti-transness for those of us that are not trans. Whether that is our classism for those of us who have access to any kind of money resources. And that work for me has meant hopefully developing better consciousness and then actually doing better in my interpersonal relationships and in my organizing. And one thing that I've come to learn, both in talking about it but also through experiencing it throughout my lifetime, is that so many of us who exist at the intersection of multiple oppressions are constantly being forced to pick one, to cut off pieces ourselves, to only bring in whatever is the most palatable or the most palatable version of that. And then when we attempt to stake out spaces, whether it's space like this conference that you've begun to develop and that you will hopefully be growing, expanding, and bringing money in to support less resourced people for next year and the years to come, or whether it's this one little dinky Facebook group, that is when the knives come out. That's when the knives come out. We see multiply oppressed people organizing and building community, we meaning the people with privilege and power, and that becomes an invitation to shut it down. We see the people who have lived experience of multiple oppression attempting to become empowered, attempting to rewrite the narrative, attempting to work toward our own freedom instead of waiting for the white-abled saviors, and that becomes an invitation to ramp up the violence, to escalate the violence. Something that I've been thinking about for the past couple of years is that among people that I know very well, I was a bit of an anomaly during the past election cycle. Going back to the Republican National Convention, when people were commenting to me, who do you think is going to become our president? Who do you think the Republicans are going to nominate? Who do you think the Democrats will nominate? Whatever they were saying, I said, I think it's pretty certain that Donald Trump is going to become our president. And most of my friends laughed at me, nervously. They nervously laughed at me. They were like, well, we are scared by the fact that he's gaining a lot of support and attention and that some people are dropping out, leaving him still in the race, but he can't become president. We won't elect him. It will be terrifying. It will be terrifying that people vote for him, period, but he won't become president. Well, here we are. He's president, and I had one of my very sickening feelings of, I told you so, and I don't want to be saying this. And for me, thinking about it, the reason why it seemed apparent to me that this was likely the trajectory of our history is because this is a country that is built on white supremacy. That is what we live in. We live in a country that is built on a genocide of indigenous peoples, that is built on chattel slavery of enslaved Africans, that is built upon exterminating and excluding anybody who is not white and cannot assimilate into whiteness. That is the history of this country. So when people were telling me this is disconcerting and confusing and upsetting that a white supremacist is going to be in the White House, I was saying, well, have you looked at most of our presidents? Because most of them, if not all of them, were white supremacists to some degree or another, with the possible exception of our only black president not being a white supremacist because he is actually a person of color. Notwithstanding all of the many things that we could critique about what he did to fuck over other black, brown, and indigenous people. But, that being said, I'm thinking, look at the history of this country. Look at the land that we are physically occupying right now. For any of us who are not indigenous and from here, indigenous, this is occupied land. We can argue about the semantics of exactly which of us count as settlers and which of us do not, but the fact is this is not our land, unless you are indigenous. I don't know everyone in the room. Anyone here who's not indigenous, which includes me, not our land, right? Not our land. And so for me, thinking about what does this mean for my activism, my organizing, it's not now we're in a crisis that is somehow this major crisis that no one's ever experienced, but rather look to our ancestral knowledge. What have our ancestors survived? What have our ancestors survived that thankfully we are no longer facing? And what have our ancestors survived that we still face, but we can learn from the wisdom and strength of our ancestors in movement, in struggle, in community, in order to get through it? We are not going through something that is fundamentally new. The face of it, the manifestation of it, the names of the legislation, the names of the players, the specific tactics and groups, the specific incidents, sure, all of that's going to change. All of that's going to change. But white supremacy didn't go away, ableism didn't go away, settler colonialism didn't go away, and our shit that we have to deal with and unpack in our own homes and our movements did not end. It did not end. So the work that I've done, I didn't really talk about this, and I know that I know a couple of you, and I don't know if I know everybody else in the room. I have a disability called prosopagnosia, or face blindness. I do not recognize people's faces, which is really fun at parties, sarcasm, but the work that I've actually done has tried to meld together approaches of community organizing, of policy advocacy, of social media work, and of doing educating.